Australia's #1 breakfast show. Alan Jones on 2GB 873. 2GB.
Yes, on Monday, January 25, I'd normally at this time make a comment, and I will reserve that till later in the program because our guest this morning is the distinguished Lord Monckton. It's not so long ago that I interviewed from the other part of the world Viscount Monckton of Brenchley. Lord Monckton is now in town. Indeed, at 5:30 on Wednesday afternoon of this week, he'll be in the grand ballroom of the Sheraton on the Park Hotel. It's only $20. He'll answer significant questions, such as why did the Copenhagen conference fail? Why has global warming science failed? Why are the alarmists wrong? And why does the government still want to introduce a global warming tax which could bankrupt the nation? Those questions will be asked and answered on Wednesday afternoon. Professor Ian Plymouth, whom I've spoken often on this program, the author of Heaven and Earth, will also speak. I'll be the coordinator and MC of a couple of very important hours of important debate. But when I last interviewed Lord Monckton, the text of that interview went around the world. Suddenly people started to wake up that we were being hoodwinked by a whole heap of propagandists about so-called global warming rather than science. Christopher Monckton, as I said then, has a distinguished public career. He was a special advisor to Margaret Thatcher when she was Prime Minister, and indeed it was Lord Monckton who advised Margaret Thatcher in 1986 that global warming might be a problem and recommended it be investigated. 1986. It was Margaret Thatcher who established the Hadley Centre for Prediction and Research, and in 2007 a city institution invited Lord Monckton to advise it on whether global warming was a problem. Lord Monckton's 40-page report concluded that global warming would not alter, and it would not, in fact, be any issue which would constitute a global crisis. He was commissioned then to write 2 pieces for the Sunday Telegraph. The first attracted so many hits that the Telegraph website crashed. Twice last year he testified before the US Congress, but on a third occasion when the elected Republican minority had chosen him to respond to testimony by Al Gore before the Energy and Commerce Committee of the US Congress, the Democrat majority rejected the chosen witness, Lord Monckton, for the first time since Congress was founded. That's how far these people are prepared to go to deny those people who might challenge their views. And of course it was in America when he addressed 100,000 mine workers and their families on a reclaimed mountaintop in West Virginia that the then secret draft Copenhagen Climate Treaty, proposing the establishment of an unelected world government with powers to inflict unlimited taxes, fines and regulations on all nations, made front-page headlines across Canada. And it was that publicity that prompted me to then make contact with Lord Monckton, and in a rather circuitous way, he's now in Australia. He's with me in the studio. Good morning.
Good morning, Alan, and what a wonderful introduction. After that, I just can't wait to hear what I'm going to say.
You need a sense of humour, don't you, talking about all of this?
Well, you really do. The great thing is the other side doesn't have one, and so I'm having a blast.
Good on you. Kevin Rudd and Barack Obama would tell you that Copenhagen was a success.
Well, if they will believe that, as the Duke of Wellington used to say, they will believe anything. Of course, from the point of view of those who wanted to impose on us the world government you've just quite rightly talked about, which was in the original September the 15th draft of what they had hoped to be the Copenhagen Treaty, none of that is happening. Instead, they reached a so-called accord by which, by January the 31st, all the countries of the world were supposed to write to the Secretariat of the States Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and say how much carbon emissions they were prepared to reduce by 2020, which is the reference date for the accord. So far, only 20 of the 192 countries that have signed up to this accord have sent their details in.
And they've now abandoned the deadline.
They've now abandoned that. They've said it's a soft deadline. It wasn't a soft deadline. It was just about the only thing that was actually agreed to at Copenhagen. Even that has now drifted off into the sand.
Our Prime Minister said to the National Press Club just over a year ago that to delay any longer would be reckless and irresponsible for our economy and our environment.
Well, he's wrong. The longer we wait, the better, frankly, because let's just put the Copenhagen Accord into perspective. Let us suppose that all the nations who are going to be bound by it, and that's essentially only the Western nations, were to reduce their carbon emissions by 2020 by 6 times the amount that Kevin Rudd is prepared to promise. He's talking of kind of 5%. Let's make it 30%. And then let's assume that they all comply with what we imagine they're going to say they'll comply with. Now, in fact, they didn't comply with the Kyoto Protocol, which preceded the Copenhagen Accord, because they were supposed to bring down world carbon emissions by 2 years from now to roughly where they were in 1990. At the moment, with only 2 years to go, the carbon emissions worldwide are 40% above where they were in 1990.
But we've spent trillions of dollars.
So trillions of dollars totally wasted. This is taxpayers' money. This is putting working people out of jobs. This is what's so offensive about it, that it's often left-wing parties who are the most active in destroying the jobs of the very people who look to them for support and help. It's a tragedy.
Now, there was supposed to be at the end of January declared reduction targets. Do you think that someone at the United Nations has realised that all these scams that have been exposed about Himalayan glaciers and leaked emails has really destroyed the credibility of these people?
I think the United Nations Climate Panel is now a busted flush. Yeah. For instance, Rajendra Pachauri, its chairman, Sir John Horton, its former chairman, and a number of other people associated with it are now under formal criminal investigation in the United Kingdom for filing false accounts of a charity known as TERI Europe, of which they are all trustees. For the last 3 years, they have underdeclared their income of that charity, saying there was less than £10,000 income each. In fact, I sent to the Charity Commission a docket from our Department of Food and Environmental Affairs that said that it had paid them £30,000 in just 1 year. We've now discovered they were getting income certainly in the millions, and this wasn't being disclosed. So very, very serious financial irregularities by these global warming profiteers, who are the very people running this organisation, which, by what it now laughs off as a misprint, said that all the Himalayan glaciers would have gone by 2035, when they now say what they really meant was 2350. And they say that this was a peer-reviewed report. And if you go back and look at what the peer reviewers said when the 2007 UN report was being produced, they produced 4 of these reports, 2007 is the most recent, the peer reviewers said, surely this figure is nonsense.
That's it. They were warned.
They were told,
and they printed it.
But they printed it
and they
anyway.
allowed Copenhagen to go ahead, and they didn't in any way ventilate the criticism that had been already offered about those figures.
And that's not the only thing that was wrong. I mean, I found out on the day of publication of the 2007 report that they'd multiplied by 10 the observed contribution to sea level rise of the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets, by 10. And I got in touch with them and said, you will correct this. And 2 days later, furtively, on their website, no publicity, they simply relabeled and re-added up and corrected the table they'd got wrong. A table which hadn't even been put into the original scientist draft. Somebody had stuck it in afterwards.
This report won a Nobel Prize.
Yes, exactly. And I, in fact, am also a Nobel Prize winner because I made that correction. I'm part of the process that got the Nobel Prize. Do I deserve it? No. Do they deserve it? No. The thing is a joke.
John Bolton, the Bush administration's UN representative, accused Kevin Rudd in Copenhagen of pursuing an emissions tax in order to micromanage the economy. China and India accused Mr Rudd of being a show pony. Now, Mr Rudd's been back on deck here for a week, and there's not one single word has been uttered about climate change, global warming or Copenhagen. You have written a letter to Mr Rudd, have you not?
The main point I made in that letter is this, that if we go back to these figures, let's suppose we all cut by 30% our emissions between now and the year 2020. It's not going to happen. Let's assume we do. Then global temperature warming forestalled by the trillions of dollars of damage and the mass unemployment that compliance with Copenhagen would cause, would reduce global temperatures or prevent them rising by 0.02 Celsius. You couldn't even measure it with a thermometer.
No.
You wouldn't notice the difference at a cost of trillions. And it's that kind of utter disconnect between the real world and the policies that the world's governing class are following that is so extraordinary. And I've got to be very careful here. I'm a guest in your country. I don't want to be going after Kevin Rudd in the way that on November the 6th he went after me personally by name. I don't do things ad hominem like that because, as Cicero's teacher taught him when he was being taught to speak, the argument against the man rather than against the person is for children only. Grown-ups don't do it. What I'm going to do is address the argument in a wider sense and say that the political class generally, the opposition here almost as much as the governing party until recently, were saying that they wanted an ETS, they wanted to, and you rightly said it earlier, to bankrupt the Australian economy, to set Australia, and of course the wider West generally, because many other countries are trying to do the same thing, competing to show leadership by closing down more of their economies than anybody else. It's bonkers.
Well, of course, Barack Obama's not going to do anything now after Massachusetts, is he?
No, I think he's now realised that he's not going to get cap and trade, the largest tax increase
Absolutely.
in the entire history of the world, not just America.
In a country with trillions and trillions of dollars of debt. But our government here says it will put the legislation for its carbon pollution reduction scheme before the Parliament for a third time when Parliament resumes next month.